So on to our main event. In keeping with our program's focus on connecting adoption research with practice and policy, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Professor Mary Dozier. Dr. Dozier is professor of psychology and holds the Amy E. DuPont Chair of Child Development at the University of Delaware. She completed her BA in psychology at Duke University in psychology and her Ph.D. in clinical psychology also at Duke. Since coming to Delaware in 1994, she studied the development of young children who were neglected and young children experiencing foster care. She has developed training programs for the caregivers of these children with efficacy trials funded by the National Institute of Mental Health. Her work has been at the forefront of understanding the connections among experience, brain development, and behavior, with the goal of creating intervention programs to help children and their families. Professor Dozier has published over 80 articles in the very best journals in the field and has presented numerous invited addresses in the United States and around the world, including in the Netherlands, in Chile, in Ireland, Wales, Scotland, and other countries as well. Her record of grant support for her research is very impressive. She's been continually funded by the National Institute of Mental Health for over 20 years, garnering over $25 million in funding either as principal investigator or co-investigator. In 2006, she won the National Institute of Mental Health Innovation Award, and in 2007, she won the Bowlby Ainsworth Award for translational research on adoption. And this is a very special honor because it really addresses the translational idea, it really addresses the application of this knowledge for the benefit of children and their families. And so we're so fortunate to have Dr. Dozier here with us today to really contribute to our understanding of how well-timed interventions can promote the development of attachment in young children who've experienced early adversity. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Mary Dozier.
Thanks, Hal, so very much. It's just such an honor to be here. The program that you've got at UMass is just incredible, and this conference is incredible. The first 2 years speakers have, I feel humbled to be presenting here at the third. And I've talked with a number of you last night, and what I know is the people who come here have just fascinating interest in lines of work, and I hope to get to talk to many more of you today. But thanks so much for having me, and let me just get this up. We're set. Let me know if it's hard to hear in the back. You're able to hear just fine? Turn it up a little bit. Get a little closer to the mic. And throughout my talk, please signal, because there's nothing worse than people not being able to hear. What I will be talking about is the work that we've been doing over the last 17 to 18 years in identifying issues that are critical for children who have experienced early adversity and the interventions that we've developed. I'll tell you a little bit more about the directions that we've gone in just a moment. This is based on the premise that babies and toddlers are biologically prepared to depend upon their caregivers. This is me and my firstborn child here. It's very blue. It wasn't before. I don't know if that's, if there's, I guess that doesn't matter. You can let me know. But I'd wonder if maybe something was turned there. But and what you're struck with in this next slide is the similarity between this rhesus mother and her infant. And the reason I like to juxtapose those two slides is because I see it as we have no choice. Human infants, really, it's not a choice about whether one depends upon their caregiver. They must depend upon their caregiver. And they're relying on their caregiver for virtually everything: temperature regulation, neuroendocrine regulation. Don't worry if you don't know what I mean by that right now. I'm going to come back to that. But protection from infection, protection from danger, security, and so forth. So when there is a failure in this caregiving system, I'd suggest that nothing can be more threatening. Even the absence of food and water aren't as threatening as the absence of a caregiver. In terms of our evolutionary history, one could live for longer without food and water than without a caregiver to protect you. So babies then adapt. They adapt in ways that help them deal with this challenge, but can also make parenting more challenging, and also may be ways that in the long run really have significant costs to them. As I've mentioned, we have studied the ways in which children adapt, and then we've developed interventions that target these specific issues. I assume the blue doesn't bother? I think it's fixable because it didn't used to be blue when we looked at it before, but nobody's bothered by the blue slides. Okay. The intervention that we have developed is called Attachment and Biobehavioral Catch-up. This is a 10-session intervention that we developed in our lab, I and my students and some staff. And as I've mentioned, this targets issues that we have identified empirically in terms of our research findings that we've identified as important, and also that other people have it in their labs. And at this point, we have 4 different interventions that are very overlapping. An intervention for foster parents of infants, an intervention for high-risk birth parents that have been identified by Child Protective Services is at risk for neglecting their children and at risk for having their children removed. That's the intervention I'm going to be talking most about today, but it shares the same first 2 components with all of the other interventions. The third is parents adopted internationally. And the third component's the only one that's different here. And feel free to ask me about how this differs. We'll have a half an hour for questions at the end if you would like to hear specifically about that. We're just early in this randomized trial for the children adopted internationally. So I'm not going to be able to tell you anything about findings there. I can only tell you what our intervention looks like. And then fourth, foster parents of toddlers. And this is an intervention that incorporates both attachment and limit-setting social learning issues. And we're even earlier in this randomized clinical trial, so I'm not going to be able to tell you what that looks like in terms of effects. So I will be focusing on these first 2, but primarily the high-risk birth parents. And I'm able to show you videos of high-risk birth parents who have agreed to show their videos. So it's almost all these videos that I will be showing you. We've identified 3 key issues. First, what we found is that children who have experienced early adversity often do things that push their caregivers away. And what you see in this first video is not a child who's being pushed away by his parents, but rather a child who is going right to his mom. This is in the context of the strange situation. A strange situation is a series of separations and reunions with the caregivers. What you'll see is this child at the end of a separation where he's sort of playing listlessly. He's not crying, but he's not happy. And then when his mom comes back, what you can see is how happy he is to see her and how he delights in going to her. So what we did is we studied the development of the attachment in the first 60 days of a child's being placed in foster care. We asked foster parents to tell us each day what happened when you were separated from your child, what happened when your child was hurt. And then we looked to see what impact the child's behavior had on the parent's behavior. And what we found is that children's behavior, like what you just saw there, were powerful in eliciting complementary behaviors from their parents. Like in terms of this child, it's so easy, as you can imagine, to want to pick up that child. I want to show you next a child that turns away from her mom. So that's tougher for a parent, as you can imagine. And what our contingency analysis showed us when we looked at what the parent had said that the child did and what they did in response, is that parents tended to turn away from these children after a while. And so even parents who were naturally nurturing ended up not providing nurturance to a child like this, a child who turned away. I want to next show you a video of a mom who is articulating her feelings when she's reunited with a child who doesn't look very interested in her.
Hi, Peter. What are you doing now? Outlets aren't good.
So were you able to hear that? She said, you don't care about mommy. And that's an issue that we have found cuts across foster moms, certainly, but also neglecting birth moms. As we get them to try to change, the problem is that the child is going to be expecting what they've gotten in the past. And so even as a mom becomes more nurturing, the child is not going to expect that. And so the mom might not get the gratification that we might get if we've had a more continuous relationship with the child. And also, internationally adopted parents. There are things such as something this is the third issue that I'm not going into, but indiscriminate sociability, the child who looks like anybody will do, can be really disconcerting for a parent. And turning that into, it's not personal. This is not personal. This is essentially about the child. And our basic message is, this child needs you, even though she may not appear to need you. I know this has been turned up. Am I talking too loud or too? Okay, it's fine. So the issue is, your child may not appear to need you, but every child needs their parent. And so you need to reinterpret their signals, seeing that this child needs you even though she may not appear to. And again, I think this is tougher for all three of the populations that I've mentioned. Neglecting birth parents, foster, and internationally adopting. And when I say internationally adopting, I'm really mostly meaning post-institutionalized. What I want to show you, these are our 10 sessions, and it's a manualized intervention that we've got, but if this is, for example, memorized and read or whatever, it's a totally ineffective intervention, as you might imagine. It's very much tailored to the parent, and I'll show you some ways in which it's tailored, but it's hard to get the full flavor of that unless you see full sessions. But we start with this issue of providing nurturance even though it's not elicited by the child. We do this partly because this is the easiest thing we do by far. It's all about the child. And so almost everybody can buy into this. Then we go into the other components that I will get to: following the child's lead, reducing frightening behavior, recognizing how your own issues impinge upon your difficulties, perhaps nurturing or following their lead, and then consolidating. One of the ways that we do each of these things, I wouldn't even say one of the ways, probably the most important thing that we do is providing feedback in the moment. We also do videotaped feedback for parents, and we thought this was going to be the key, but in some ways that's one step more removed than this in the moment. By that, what I mean is everything that the mom and the child does that relate to one of these three intervention components, and only that relate to these intervention components, you comment on. You provide sort of a running monologue on, oh, look, he looked at you. You can just tell how much he looks to you for what he needs. Or you took that toy from him. Man, that's exactly what we're talking about. Or, and I hope you can hear this. I'll show you a video of supporting nurturance. It's a little hard to hear, but basically you'll get this feeling that this interventionist is just commenting upon everything, supporting this mom's picking up her child. So this is in support of nurturance, is what you will see right now. Oh, these are examples that I've just been through. We have a lot of examples of how to support this when you see it, and what do you do when you don't see it. Things like taking the blame. I'm so sorry. I know if I weren't, I'm getting in the way of your picking him up when he cries or whatever.
Oh, be careful. You okay, Bubba? Come on, Bubba. He was just like...
No, that's great that you're going right over to him just like that. Yes, pick him right up.
First time he ever laid on the grill.
Oh, that's perfect. It's so nice that you just pick him up and hold him like that. Because you're bigger. That's all you needed, right? Is a hug and a kiss. And no one else.
And it's just so striking as we see people making these in-the-moment comments. It's so much more powerful than the things that we're going through in the intervention. And you see, for one thing, parents just light up, but you also see them really appreciating what it is that we're wanting them to work on. Keep in mind, we're really doing just three things, and that's what I emphasize, because when people sort of get into everything that's going on in people's lives, I mean, as you can see, this mom is out on the porch because her husband doesn't want her inside. Her husband's leaving her during parts of our 10 sessions. She's in a shelter. There's a million things going on in this parent's life. You can imagine if you're going to help her with all of those things, you won't do these three things. And so it's only these three things that you do. And that's what we want her to be nurturing at the end. We want her to follow the child's lead, and we want her to not be frightening. And even though she'll still be very poor and she'll still be in and out of a shelter, if she's doing those things, it's almost a cocoon for the child. I think the child will be protected in some ways. The second issue is that children are often dysregulated behaviorally and biologically when they've experienced early adversity. And again, this cuts across all three of our interventions. I want to provide you with our evidence that children are dysregulated. It's not a very meaningful word in and of itself. We have looked at biological dysregulation primarily as with regard to cortisol production. Cortisol is an end product of the HPA axis. I want to tell you, some of you know the HPA axis well, some of you not. So try not to glaze over if you don't know it during this, but I'll just tell you a little bit about this. The HPA axis refers to the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. The hypothalamus, when stressed or whatever, a variety of things, the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary to the adrenal, and then the adrenal produces cortisol. And cortisol, then, this is the same cartoon as the previous one. The previous one had the human in it, the next one doesn't. But I want to show you this because once cortisol is produced, it feeds back to the pituitary and the hypothalamus. It's a negative feedback loop, essentially sending the message, okay, cut it out. We're reacting already. The problem is when children experience chronic ongoing stress, this system doesn't really work as it's intended. A book that is wonderful that was written by Robert Sapolsky, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, is just that title sort of gives away what this system was designed for. It's really designed for short-term crises that we have to react to and we have to run from danger, and then we can, the system's sending back, okay, cut it out, and your cortisol can your levels will go back to basal levels after a while, and so forth. But you can imagine that in the world in which we live, that's not how stressors work. We are, especially children living in maltreating environments, or graduate students worrying about their dissertations, or whatever it might be. Sometimes stressors go on in ways that our systems were not really intended for. And I would say that there's two orthogonal functions of this HPA system. And while I've talked about the stress reactive function, where we mount a response to a stressor. It's not just any stressor. It's not that but it's a stressor that's a real challenge to you. But the other function is separate from that. It's orthogonal to that, and that's the diurnal function, which we show a high morning level of cortisol, and cortisol goes down across the day. And the reason that that's a diurnal function is that this is part of our systems helping us to be diurnal creatures, to get us up in the morning and go to bed at night, to be up when other members of our species are up. And it's interesting because you see rodents, for example, showing just the inverse of that. They show the nocturnal spike and the low level in the morning. So that's part of a variety of systems that help them get up at night, and I guess not all rodents, but rats, and go down at night. So this is, don't worry about what's on this y-axis, but basically this is sort of what it looks like for most of us, and it looks like this from the time you're a year or so old through old age. But so you have a high morning value, and then 30 minutes later this peaks, and then it comes down pretty quickly across the day to a near zero level at night. Now, the reason I'm talking about this more than the stress reactivity is I'm part of a center of people who look at these things. What we have found as a group is that infants and young children often don't show much in the way of stress reactivity. But where we do find real effects on the HPA system is in this diurnal production of cortisol. So that's why I'm showing this to you, even though I've mentioned the stress reactive function. So we try to look close to wake up and close to bedtime is what we do. This is sequestered in saliva, meaning that you can look at this in spit. So, and then as you can see with this child, he likes it. We put Kool-Aid on a cotton roll, and he likes it. And so it's an easy thing to measure. Now, this is a little bit confusing slide, so let me go through it. Just look at the yellow bar for a moment. These are low-risk kids. And what you can see is the highest morning value for these kids and the lowest evening value for these kids. So a nice steep slope, going back to that earlier slide. So you see the sharpest from morning to evening among these kids. And then when you look at neglected kids living with their birth families, you see the flattest slopes. You see morning values being lower than low-risk kids, and evening values being higher. So a flatter slope. And then foster children are intermediate to that. They're the middle slope. So this was part of our evidence that children who are living in neglecting families and even foster care are dysregulated biologically. The system isn't working like it is for low-risk children. there's a lot of evidence for behavioral dysregulation. There's a lot of evidence just that these children have more behavior problems, children in foster care and neglected children. I think I'll present you very quickly with evidence from what we have looked at with something called inhibitory control. And I would call inhibitory control is what I would say is the most important thing that 5-year-olds need when they go to school. You guys must already know what inhibitory control is. Because it's okay if you don't know your numbers, and it's okay if you don't know your letters. But if you can't sit in a chair and do this thing that's kind of boring and not jump up and look out the window, you're going to get in trouble. And so what inhibitory control is doing the things that you might not want to do and not doing the things you do want to do. So doing that worksheet, not jumping up and looking at the window. So we've got, and other people have used this too, it's called the day-night Stroop-like test that Adele Diamond and her colleagues developed. But what this asks is for children to say the opposite of what they want to say. So it's inhibiting the dominant response. And so we ask them to say day when they see night, and to say night when they see day. Make sense? And you can kind of relate that to, I want to hop up. I want to do something different, but I'm going to do this. I want to say day here, but no, I'll say night. And what we found here is that children who had 2 or more foster placements had poorer performance on this task of inhibitory control than children who had 1 placement or children never in foster care. And this is very similar to a finding that Phil Fisher also has. But basically, the more chaotic your life is, the poorer your inhibitory control, at least if you were to extrapolate from these findings. So those couple of pieces of evidence suggest to me that these children really have problems with behavioral and biological regulation. And so what we want to do, it's pretty easy with the first one. How do we help parents be nurturing when children don't elicit nurturance? But how do we help develop regulatory capabilities? And we looked back at the literature on young infants and how people helped babies who were premature or just very difficult, how they helped them to regulate. And what we ran into is that synchronous responding was so important. Responding sort of in kind, not taking the lead, but rather following the child's lead. And if you think of that with a young infant, the child who makes a face and the mom who mimics it. But we did this with older children, with 1 to 2-year-olds, having the mom stop trying to lead and teach and so forth, but rather follow the lead. And then the second piece that we found that was really missing from, and we didn't have an empirical basis for this, but we had our gut instincts told us that it couldn't be a mechanically following the child's lead. It had to be with delight. It had to be just taking joy in the child. And I think we're coming up with some evidence that fits with that, but I have to say that's somewhat post hoc, because it was more our sense that this just doesn't work when a mom's just following along. So I want to show you a video here of in-the-moment commenting by our interventionist, where she's essentially supporting this mom taking the child's lead.
Well, actually, what we found is very nice job responding to the signals. Right. You see that smile on his face? Yes, he feels so good when you do that. Look how he looks at you.
So it's short, but what you can see is this constant kind of supporting of moms. And sometimes at the beginning, we're not seeing them take the lead much at all. But you still, it's the sort of catching them when they are, or catching the child when the child's approaching the mom. And so really supporting that. I'm sure one thing that you so know is that there's nothing more threatening You videotape me and I get more self-conscious, but you videotape a mom and you're there watching her parent. Boy, what could be more threatening than that? So we really work very hard to support, and only later then start making suggestions or comments or saying, well, who was taking the lead there, or what happened there, or things like that. Again, we're so aware of how this mom is going to need support, and I would say across any population, and then moving toward a place where you can make more suggestions. But I think the scaffolding really results in really nice interactions lots of times. The third component is that parents often behave in frightening ways to their children, and children need parents who are not frightening. And so parents behave in frightening ways, and I would say this is not a component that is there with our internationally adopting parents. We have this component with our neglecting birth parents, and that's where we added the component in. But after adding it in, we realized that this was also a very useful thing to have with foster parents. Foster parents are less likely to threaten in the same way as birth parents, but we still were finding people threatening in ways of, I would call your social worker, or you'd better not do that. And so we've added it into that intervention as well. But it's used for, I think, several reasons. One is certainly to control behavior, but a second is that sometimes parents are not aware that they are doing this. They're not aware that what they're doing is frightening, and so it often takes, in this case, showing videos over and over again so that they can see how it might have been frightening and what the child's reaction was. Now, the question is, why does frightening behavior matter so much? What is so problematic about this? Well, basically, as I said before, babies have no choice. They have to rely upon their caregiver. But when you have a caregiver that's frightening, you're sort of stuck. You're stuck between needing to go to that parent for care, but being frightened at the same time. Mary Main has talked about this as a dilemma without solution, that there's nothing you can do. It's interesting because people, not you, but people outside the field will often think that a child won't develop an attachment to a maltreating caregiver. That, of course, is not true. It doesn't make any sense to us. But it's striking that with rodent pups, Regina Sullivan and her colleagues have found that if you give a pinch to or a shock to a rodent pup during a particular postnatal period, what will happen is they'll actually show a preference for whatever is associated with that tail pinch or with that shock. So they are so geared toward needing to want to be with that parent that the system has to be built so that you will still connect to that parent even if they're hurtful to you. So that's a rodent example. We don't talk in terms of more or less attached from an attachment theory perspective, but the point is really, of course, babies have no choice. They have to have an attachment to this caregiver. So the problem is then what happens, and what we see. I haven't gone into other attachment organizations, but what happens or tends to happen is that when children have frightening behaviors, they're at most risk for what's known as disorganized attachment. And disorganized attachment is still attachment, but it's a breakdown in strategy. And I'm going to show you an example of this, but I also want to describe it. Again, think in terms of the child has been separated from their caregiver and is being reunited with their caregiver. And they want to go, and yet they're frightened of that parent. And so this is seen in a variety of ways. It's seen in terms sometimes of apprehension, something like their hand to their mouth or backing off. It's seen in maybe stilling or freezing. contradictory attachment strategies, and stereotypies. I'm going to show you the most extreme example I've ever seen, and I probably should not show you the most extreme example because then you don't really get the sense of what a big continuum this really is. But what you see with this child is a child who's so clearly upset by his mother not being there, but who is not able to use her at all in any way, and he has no strategy for dealing with her when she returns.
Show me a toy you want to play with, and I'll play with you.
This is the stranger right now, and again, it's clear that he's upset. Whoops.
Show me a toy you want to play with, and I'll play with you.
Benedict, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
It's a difficult one to watch. You've got others where a child might just be standing with her mom, upset, but neither able to approach nor able to turn away to her toys. So it signals a breakdown in strategy. And there's one reason that we care particularly is that disorganized attachment is associated with long-term problems more than avoidant or resistant attachment is. And I've just alluded to avoidant and resistant, but avoidant would be turning away from the mom. Resistant would be sort of fussy and irritable. But they're not, I don't worry about them in terms of intervening because they're not strongly related to long-term problems. Disorganized attachment is strongly related to long-term problems. So Betty Carlson and other people have found that, well, Betty in particular, that if you look at a child at 18 months of age and follow that child till they're 21 years of age, you can predict dissociative symptoms 20 years later. Just shocking in terms of all of the other things that are going to happen along the way. This Farron et al. Have a meta-analysis in which they looked across a number of studies and found that disorganized attachment is especially associated with externalizing problems, acting out, being bad, and so forth, and that's a reasonably strong effect. So for me, what I want to look for with these kids is what are the issues, and what issues will go away on their own? I don't need to worry about them. What issues won't go away? And I feel like we've got to intervene there. So this is one where I think for these children who are in neglecting homes or foster homes, we've got to intervene so that they don't develop disorganized attachment. And how we help parents reduce this frightening behavior is that we first, and this is midway through our intervention. We couldn't do this in session 1 or 2 or 3, but this is after we've done a lot with nurturance, a lot with following the lead. And then we help them in relatively benign situations, just recognize things that might be intrusive. Tickling is an example for me, because I think that most kids don't like to be tickled or might not like to have Gucci goo or have things done to them. And so helping them to become less intrusive, to notice the child's reaction times when they are more intrusive, and then go from there to things that are more frankly frightening in their behavior. So we help them to notice those behaviors and then think of maybe their own history a little bit, not a lot here, but why this might be their natural way to interact with a young child. And then help them to see that they have other choices for controlling behavior or whatever it might be. So these are our 3 components. First, children push their caregiver away, so we want them to provide nurturance even though it's not elicited. And we expect this, as well as them thinking about their own issues, being more leading to a secure, organized attachment. And then children are dysregulated behaviorally and biologically, and so we help parents to provide very responsive care. We expect that to lead to enhanced regulatory capabilities, but also indirectly to secure, organized attachment. And then parents behave in frightening ways, them learning not to behave in frightening ways, we expect to have effects on both of these two issues. Now, one thing that I haven't mentioned, and this is, we get into this later in intervention. Keep in mind, this is only 10 sessions. This isn't 2 years. This is 10 sessions. But later, being session 7 and 8, we help parents think about how their own issues may make it difficult for them to do the things we're asking them to do. And we talk about these usually in terms of voices from the past, things from their own history that affect their sort of what they do. And it's my sense that if I was raised a fairly avoidant child, I was somebody who was wanted to say, hey, I'm okay, or everything's great. And so I think my normal propensity, had I not been developing this intervention and been in psychology for 15 years before I had children, if my child had bumped his head, it would have been to say, oh, you're okay, or look out the window, do things the way my mom had done them. And I would say that would be a direct connection. My child is hurt, I respond this way. And so what we want to do is to break that connection between this happens, I do this. And what we want to do is we want to get them aware that there's choices here. After this happens, there's choices. And one of the ways to know to sort of make that more aware is think, oh, it's not really that I have to make him okay. I just think that because that's what always happened to me. So we get them to think through a little bit about what happened to them when they were hurt, what happened to them when they wanted to, in terms of their parent letting them take the lead. We're not doing psychotherapy, so I'm not, to be honest, I don't really care that we get through all of this and process it. What I care about is that they are that they are nurturing, and that they follow the child's lead. But I think the only way to do it is to make non-automatic what was previously automatic, if you know what I mean. So to this day, as a good avoidant child, when my child is distressed, the first thing that goes to my mind is, oh, how can I make it better? I can think of this other thing that he could do that would be exciting. But I can almost always stop myself and think, no, he just needs me to listen. He just needs me to cuddle him. But it's constantly an override. It's almost always that's not what he needs. What he needs is just for me to be there. So what we want people to do is not fix those issues, but be able to override those issues. To be able to and that's what we talk about, override their voices from the past. Now, I think that this is one of the ways that we talk about this. If you think about it, people who really distance themselves from difficult things are often going to be people that are really tough in session to say, I don't have any problems. There's nothing. My parents were great. So we try to put this in terms of it's a strength to acknowledge your weakness, or a strength to acknowledge your issues, because in a way that reduces the resistance around that a little bit. So this is something that we have found works well. We've certainly tweaked it a lot over time. It's not the easiest thing to do, but I think that it works. So basically, parents need to provide nurturing care and responsive care, even if it doesn't come naturally to them. And again, we try to help them to override their usual approach, responding in a less automatic fashion. So our 3 targets are nurturance. We want you to pick up this crying baby, even if the child doesn't elicit it. Follow the lead with delight, and don't frighten your child. I want to show you now, and I know some of these are going to be really dark, and I apologize. It's just a couple of videos that are going to be dark. The best video is quite light, so don't give up on me through the dark ones. The first is what you see at the beginning with one mom when she's asked to. This is just an intervention session 1, and you can see interventionist discomfort with the mom not taking care of her child and not reaching out to the child.
Yeah. So you can see that. What? Are we done? Have I been here long enough? I'm afraid she's gonna. I think that we could probably finish today. So this is actually when we're using the lead. So he's upset. You might take the lead and pick him up and call him. So try that using the lead.
Now you'll see this child in the post-intervention. This is the strange situation that you'll be seeing. And as you can see, the mom will be coming in following the separation. Thing is, the mom clearly got it. She looks very different than she did early on. Now you're going to see a mom being asked to play with her child as she usually would in the pre-intervention. And I know this will be dark, but what you will see is that the mom is just sitting there for a minute, not doing anything, and then when she does start interacting, it's to take charge, pretty much.
This way? No, look. You could go right there. Put this one in. You did it twice. It looks like going no more.
Now you'll see a video of the same mom in session 4, and it's not that it's. I think she's different, but she's been asked to make pudding with the child, and we do this with everybody. We do this because we want to challenge people to, who follows their lead with making pudding with a 1-year-old. I mean that's pretty extreme, but it's a very useful experience with parents. The one negative about it is that what we want people to do is to let the child take the lead all the time. So we don't want them to think of these isolated pudding events as happening once every 3 years. We want it to be all the time, everything that the child does. But nonetheless, it's a useful experience as long as you qualify it in a way that parents understand that really you're talking about this as a way of living.
Right there? Yes. And this one?
Good luck, honey.
Okay, I'm not going to do it, right? What is it? Yay! Come get your spoon, right there. That tastes good. Good big boy.
Now, one thing I would say about this that's changed in our intervention is that now we would be making continual scaffolding remarks as it goes through of, oh, that's just wonderful how you said, oh, yay, and we do it sort of continuously. If you don't, sometimes you end up with a video that's hard to watch with a parent because there's not, you haven't provided enough structure. Here there were a number of things you could comment on, but I think the in-the-moment comments are key. Now, in terms of assessing outcomes, we have I guess, 4 randomized clinical trials, 2 that are nearly completed, 2 that are earlier on. And I'll be telling you about the results of the first 2, or alluding to the first 2. The ones that are ongoing, we don't yet have data on. But with these neglecting birth parents, we randomly assigned to one of 2 groups, either this attachment and biobehavioral catch-up that I've been talking about, or an educational intervention called DEF, that's Developmental Education for Families. Met with parents in their homes. I am happy to address questions of in the home. I think in the home is critical. We want parents to think of using these things all the time. I worry about coming into the office that they'll think, well, that's when I do those things with my child. And so this is very much a home visiting program where we want everybody there. We want, like, the other thing that's different is that having that child off to the side in that last one. We have everybody there. We have aunts and uncles and boyfriends and moms and 5 kids sometimes. So we want there to be their real environment, and we want it to be in their home. So in any case, this is in their home, an hour a week for 10 weeks, or however long it takes to get through 10 sessions. And we assessed attachment in the strained situation. Our breakdown was significantly different for the 2 groups. And it's different for both disorganized and secure, but I'm going to tell you specifically about disorganized attachment because that's what my biggest worry is among these kids. What you see in our ABC group is you see 32% of these children developing disorganized attachments. That's a little bit higher than it is among low-risk samples, which are more like 20%. But it's way below what we see in this control intervention, the DEF, which is about 60%. So it's almost half what you see in these guys have received treatment, but it's not affecting attachment. So to me, this was a simply wonderful and quite large effect between the 2 groups. So 30% in our ABC, 60% in our DEF. And we also looked at cortisol at wake up and bedtime for 3 days. We did this, we've done both of these things with our neglecting birth families and with our foster kids. We get differences in cortisol with both samples, significant differences, but the form of the differences is somewhat different. So if I'll just mention that. Sometimes the odd thing about cortisol is sometimes children go low and flat when they're having problems. Sometimes it goes high, depending on where you catch them. And sometimes it's just low. But what we see here is that we see our ABC kids showing a significantly steeper slope from morning to evening. We don't see morning values getting higher. What we'd like to see in 6 months is these values up here, but it's significantly steeper and lower bedtime levels than for the DEF. And if you want to hear, I'm happy to tell you about the foster kids if you want. So in terms of an overview of effectiveness, this intervention results in more optimal physiological and behavioral development. And we see that in more sensitive and less disorganized attachment. We also see it in more normative cortisol production. Now I want to show you one more video. Here you're going to see a mom with her child at pre-intervention, this one is very dark, the first part, but the post is not dark. And what you see with this mom, just because you may have trouble seeing it, is that she's got her very young infant on her lap, and she's been asked to play as she usually would. And she's just got this squeaky toy that she sort of squeaks in the child's face and then squeaks a cat to scare a cat away. But it clearly just takes no joy in the child, and there's no sense really of how to play with this child. And I think I'm now going to show you her throughout the intervention and at post. I think a lot of our moms look very flat and depressed and don't look that way at post-intervention. I don't know that it's affected depression, but I do think that we often affect what they are able to look like with their children. And here is a montage of this mom.
Well, I don't love you much, do I? What follow you to hell and back again?
I don't love much, do I? Just watch me light up when you walk in.
See how it sparkles in my eyes. I couldn't hide it if I tried. That's right, I don't love much, do I? Just more than anything else in this whole world. See how it sparkles in my eyes. I couldn't hide it if I tried. That's right, I don't love much, do I? Just more than anything else in this whole world. Well, I don't love you much, do I?
I want to acknowledge NIMH has supported our work from the beginning. Philadelphia Department of Human Services that's where all of these moms, these neglecting birth moms, have come from. We've also worked with Delaware DFS with our foster care, gotten support from Edna Bennett Pierce, and then a whole bunch of students and staff in the Infant Caregiver Project. Also part of a network and center with a number of other scientists that have affected me significantly. Seymour Levine, who is no longer living, but really got me started in this work, and Megan Gunner, Nathan Fox, Charlie Zena, Phil Fisher, Mar Sanchez, Seth Pollack, Elena Grigorenko, and a number of others. I'm especially indebted to graduate students and others who really have helped do all of this work over time. I thank you so much and would like to hear your questions at this point.